Okay, welcome to This Explainer. Today we're unpacking a story you probably think you already know inside and out. We all know the name, right? Titanic. But look, beyond the cinematic romance and the whole mythos surrounding it, the actual real-life sinking of this magnificent ship is practically a masterclass in disaster. It's a textbook case of how a compounding series of engineering flaws, mixed with some frankly unbelievable human errors, can create an absolute catastrophe. We're going to break down exactly how the unthinkable happened on that freezing night in 1912. We'll look at the data, the physics, and the sheer human hubris that literally sent a floating palace to the bottom of the Atlantic.
So here is the core mystery we're solving today. How on earth did a vessel universally hailed as the safest thing ever built just vanish on its very first trip? This was the ultimate clash, really, between extreme human arrogance and a totally devastating reality check. The people who built it were so incredibly confident in their shiny new technology that they completely and fatally underestimated the unforgiving power of nature.
To understand how it failed, we really have to understand the ambition behind it. Section 1. The Unsinkable Dream.
When this massive ship left Southampton, England, bound for New York on April 10, 1912, it represented an unparalleled financial and engineering endeavor. Building the Titanic cost about $7.5 million at the time. To put that into perspective, if we adjust for inflation, we were talking about a staggering $400 million today. It was a massive investment in pure prestige. At 269 meters in length and over 53 meters high, she wasn't just a ship, she was a literal floating palace. Everyone, the public, the media, the passengers, from wealthy industrialists all the way to hopeful immigrants, they were absolutely captivated by her scale.
Okay, let's dive into this. The amenities on board were specifically designed to make you forget you are even at sea. We're talking stained glass mirrors, ornate wood paneling, heated swimming pools, Turkish baths, electric baths, a full squash court, 4 different restaurants, and 2 barbershops. I mean, it's wild. But these unprecedented luxuries weren't just for comfort. They generated a really powerful yet entirely false sense of security. Because, when you're sitting in a warm Turkish bath, you simply don't believe you're in any mortal danger. And the vice president of the White Star Line confidently fed right into this, publicly declaring the ship unsinkable.
But, as we know, the ocean does not care about Turkish baths. Let's move to Section 2, the fatal collision.
By April 14th, the situation was getting seriously perilous. Multiple ice warnings were just flat out ignored, so the ship could maintain a really dangerous speed of 21.5 knots, that's about 40 kilometers per hour, on a freezing, totally moonless night. This wasn't some sudden ambush out of nowhere, it was more like a slow-motion car crash. Throughout the day, 7 distinct ice warnings went completely unheeded. As night fell, with zero moonlight to illuminate the obstacles in the water, visibility dropped to practically nothing. Up in the crow's nest, Lookout Frederick Fleet was battling freezing winds that were literally making his eyes tear up, blinding him even further. Finally, at 11:39 p.m., he spots the massive shape ahead. He rings the bell 3 times and screams his warning down to the bridge. Just 1 minute later, at 11:40 p.m., the disaster begins.
The really crucial point here is understanding exactly how the impact happened. The Titanic didn't hit the iceberg head-on. First Officer William ordered the ship to steer left, meaning the iceberg, which weighed 1.5 million tons, was the size of a football field and was as tall as the ship itself, just grazed along the front right side of the bow. For about 10 grueling seconds, this immense, crushing weight of ice simply tore into the metal hull.
And this right here brilliantly illustrates why the whole unsinkable claim completely fell apart. The ship relied on 2 main safety features, a double-bottom hull and 16 watertight compartments. The design was that the ship could stay afloat if up to 4 of these compartments flooded. But because the iceberg struck the side of the ship, it entirely bypassed the protection of that double bottom. The side impact sheared open the metal, breaching 6 of those watertight compartments. And well, 6 is greater than 4. At that exact moment, the cold, hard mathematics of buoyancy dictated that the unsinkable ship was officially doomed.
Which brings us to a truly harrowing chapter of this explainer. Section 3, a scarcity of survival.
As Captain Smith and the ship's architect, Thomas Andrews, assessed the damage, they realized the horrifying truth. The tragic math of the Titanic is just staggering. There were approximately 2,200 people on board. But because the company honestly believed the ship was its own lifeboat, they only equipped it with 20 lifeboats in total. Even if you fill them to maximum capacity, these boats could only hold about 1,200 people, meaning 1,000 souls were essentially condemned by a spreadsheet before the ship ever even left the dock.
But the reality was actually even worse than the theoretical math. 28. Early in the evacuation, the sense of denial was so strong that passengers just didn't believe the ship was actually sinking. They felt way safer standing on the massive, well-lit deck than swinging over the dark, freezing water in a tiny wooden boat. Because of this hesitation, the very first lifeboat, which had a capacity to save 65 people, was lowered into the freezing ocean with only 28 people aboard. More than half the seats were just left entirely empty.
As the bow filled with water, it pulled the front of the ship down, raising the stern and its massive propellers terrifyingly up into the air. The illusion of safety shattered instantly. As one survivor recalled, the end was chaotic. Everybody was crying, praying, trying to get into the few lifeboats that were left. By 2:05 a.m., the very last lifeboat was gone, leaving 1,500 people trapped. At 2:20 a.m., the ship tore in half and sank. Those who didn't go down with the ship were left in water that was -2 degrees Celsius, a temperature where hypothermia becomes fatal in a matter of minutes.
So, how could so many things go so horribly wrong? Let's dive into Section 4, the chain of blame. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the stark contrast in the rescue response. At midnight, Titanic's radio operator Jack Phillips began frantically sending SOS signals. The RMS Carpathia picked up the signal and immediately raced to help. But they were 107 kilometers away, a 3.5-hour journey. But incredibly, there was another ship, the SS Californian, sitting just 37 kilometers away. They were so close they could literally see the Titanic's distress flares lining up the sky. But their radio operator had gone to sleep, and their captain basically dismissed the flares, assuming the wealthy passengers were just throwing a late-night party. They did absolutely nothing.
This is what we call the Swiss cheese model in action. It's where multiple layers of defense fail simultaneously, and a disaster only happens because all those holes perfectly align. First, Captain Smith actually canceled a scheduled safety drill on the very day of the collision because he decided it was unnecessary. Second, when the iceberg was spotted, steersman Robert Hitchens panicked and misunderstood the order, initially turning the wheel the wrong way, right toward the iceberg. Finally, and perhaps most damningly, there's strong evidence that Joe Spruce, the chairman of the White Star Line, actively pressured the captain to maintain top speed. He even hid an ice warning in his pocket so the crew wouldn't slow down. He wanted to break a speed record to prove his ship was the fastest in the world. The sheer arrogance of a few cost the lives of so many. We conclude our analysis today with Section 5, Legacy and Decay.
It took over 70 years for humanity to even locate the consequences of this hubris. Explorer Robert Ballard finally found the wreckage 3.8 kilometers deep on the ocean floor in 1985. But long before they ever found the wreck, the sheer scale of this preventable tragedy totally shook the world into action. It fundamentally changed maritime law forever. In 1914, the International Ice Patrol was established to constantly monitor and warn ships of icebergs. And more importantly, the disaster directly led to the SOLAS Treaty, the safety of life at sea. Because of this, never again would a ship be allowed to set sail without enough lifeboats for every single passenger on board.
Yet the physical legacy of the ship is incredibly fleeting. Down in the dark, the great ship is currently being consumed by deep-sea bacteria that literally feast on its metal hull. Experts actually predict that by the year 2030, the physical wreckage of the RMS Titanic will completely disintegrate. It's going to vanish entirely from the ocean floor, leaving behind absolutely nothing but the stories and the incredibly hard-learned lessons.
But you really have to wonder, have we truly learned our lesson? Because back in 2012, an Australian billionaire announced plans to build Titanic 2, an exact replica meant to sail the very same route. Now, the project has faced endless delays and, quite frankly, a severe lack of public interest. Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought to chew on. Is the obsession with rebuilding the Titanic a genuine tribute to history, or is it merely a repetition of the exact same hubris that doomed the original? The unsinkable ship was defeated by nature once. Perhaps leaving her firmly in the past is the greatest lesson of all. Thank you for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.